For professional advice with a personal touch, consult Fuller Landau, Chartered Accountants and Business Advisors. Click on flmontreal.com.
7:05 on CJAD 800. Welcome to today's Entrepreneur, presented by Fuller Landau, a program about the entrepreneurial spirit that drives Quebec business. My name is Dan Delmar, along with Fuller Landau's Josh Miller. Hello, Josh.
Hello.
So usually we talk about Quebec entrepreneurs, but exceptionally we're going to go overseas and over to Hong Kong. And so we welcome Vincent Bremer of Orangefield ICS, the program. Vincent, welcome to CJAD.
Thank you.
And welcome to Montreal.
Yes, thank you.
So first, we have a lot to discuss. We'll get a bit more into business with China later on in the hour. But first, can you tell us a bit about Orangefield ICS and what it is that you do?
Yes. Orangefield ICS actually, the ICS part was founded by a Canadian lady back in the 80s. And she saw Hong Kong as the perfect place to start business in China. So she started the business in the 80s. Helped a lot of Canadian entrepreneurs to get started in doing their business in both Hong Kong and China. So basically what we do, which we help clients to get started, set up their legal structure. Once the legal structure is being set up, we help them to take care of all their obligations. So we help them to do their tax filings, accounting, legal services. So that's what we do both in Hong Kong and in China.
So you act, I mean, I guess, I know Orangefield ICS for many years, and Dan, we're talking about Hong Kong, which is truly close to my heart, as we've been doing, us and Fuller Landau have been involved with Hong Kong and doing business there and helping clients for almost 20 years now. And I know that Orangefield, I mean, Vincent doesn't necessarily do Orangefield ICS favor because there's so much more that they do to help the clients. I mean, they can really be that virtual office and virtual CFO where foreign companies don't have to rent their own space and don't have to hire their own people. So it's truly valuable, and certainly when you're starting out and you're kind of uncertain of the areas. So I guess that my next question is, what you have not been with Orangefield ICS or ICS in Hong Kong forever. What brought you there, and how did you find the change from where you did come from Holland or Netherlands to Hong Kong?
No, that's true. I've been with Orangefield for 14 years, but we only acquired ICS back in 2012. You're absolutely right. Basically, we're there for clients to make sure that whatever they want to use third parties for, we take care of them. So we coordinate everything they run into of doing business abroad, and basically for them dealing with new markets. A lot of the clients don't feel that comfortable yet when they start doing their business overseas. So that's where we come into the picture. And that has been the case with ICS from the 80s. I've been doing this for 4 years in Hong Kong. So before I moved to Hong Kong, I was working in the Netherlands, basically doing the other way around, helping Asian clients to get started in Europe. So dealing with a lot of Japanese, Korean clients, and later on then with the Chinese. So I've been dealing with Asian clients quite a lot, and now I'm dealing with Asian staff, which is a different angle, but probably a similar experience that it's more detailed. You really need to be more explicit in how things work and what you expect. But then also probably there's less confusion and misunderstanding than between if you deal with Western clients, because they expect you to be more proactive. Well, probably dealing with Asian clients or Asian staff, it's much more detailed.
And we'll come to the human resource factor a little later, because I know there's so much more to talk on it. But did Orangefield have a presence in Hong Kong before it acquired ICS Trust?
Yes, we had, but it was a small operation. We had about 15 staff. So we're in total 60 staff at the moment. And we have 2 China offices, one in Shanghai and one in Beijing. But the Hong Kong office was basically just a Hong Kong office, which wasn't not really dealing with China at all.
Now, certainly entrepreneurs here, they go through mergers and acquisitions all the time. And I'd like to talk a little bit about the experience that Orangefield had with ICS and kind of see, how similar, how different it is versus perhaps an acquisition here. I suspect it's rather similar, especially since you were dealing with a Canadian founder of the organization. But I'm just curious to know, when you were going through that process, did it take a long time? How from the moment that you set your eyes or started looking at until you closed the deal, how long was it?
when we start looking for a deal, I think probably and closing the deal that's over 2 years. We spoke also with some local providers, some Asian firms, and I think that actually proved to be more difficult because they have a different kind of standard looking at business differently, and probably also more reluctant to share information, which makes it difficult to do a deal because ultimately you need to provide information on your operations, on your finances. So for the Asian clients, that was for the Asian prospects or targets, that was more difficult. Then we got introduced to the ICS, and I think then even overall with the due diligence, the new negotiations, we did client interviews, staff interviews. Probably it took over a year to really, from start to finish, conclude the deal. But yeah, you're right. It's easier because the founders were Canadian, so they understood where you're coming from, and they understood what needed to be answered. So that made it.
What would you say the biggest challenge was in closing that deal?
Persons. We acquired a company which was run by 2 individuals. They owned the company. So basically they had to feel comfortable with the change.
And they owned it for a very long time.
They owned it for a very long time. So for them it was really letting something go which was theirs. And I think if you buy something which is more corporately owned, then there's probably less of an attachment to the company and its history. But in this particular case, even though probably they realized that they wanted to sell the business as a kind of retirement or plan, and actually making it happen was probably more difficult. So the most difficult part was definitely the personal part.
As you look back, is there anything that you might have done differently, or if you're looking at another acquisition, areas that you would focus on or change?
It depends a little bit on what kind of acquisition you do. We have done acquisitions whereby the previous owners remained in the company and basically became a minority shareholder, and then they saw the upside of joining a bigger group. Then it's probably easier to make it less personal. So in this particular case, we knew that the previous owner were going to fade out gradually. And looking back, we had some of the discussion directly with them while they engaged an intermediary to do the negotiations on their behalf. And probably we should have done that as well, not talk to them directly, but use the intermediary to basically deliver our message and make it less personal.
So that they don't kind of fight for their own baby, they can kind of translate it to the vendors and say, you know what, this is just normal.
Yeah, or at least the intermediary is able to explain where that is coming from and make it less personal. Because if we are sitting at the same table and really saying, looking at financial terms and conditions, reps and warranties, they're thinking about their reputation, the history of the company, rather than the financial terms and conditions. So, we should have used the intermediary for those discussions rather than sitting at the same table and discussing things openly.
Do you sense a lot of apprehension when clients want to start doing business in China?
Yes, it's for I think the interesting part for us is we can build a bridge between the East and the West. And I think the challenging part of China is still the unknown, which works for us because then that's why clients come to us. It's getting better, but still, so there are definitely opportunities in China. It's getting more transparent. But it's still for clients to make the decision and take the step into China. I think they need to have a bit more comfort, and that's really comfort which they're looking for. And if they can find a firm like us who have been accompanying so many clients into China and basically have the history and the experience with that, I think that gives them that comfort which they are looking for.
And I think, Dan, entrepreneurs have enough uncertainty when they do business or start business locally here to go 12,000 miles away in a country where Hong Kong has an official language of English, but China certainly doesn't, makes it that much more interesting. And I think when we're in the bottom half of the hour, we're going to talk about a lot of the other challenges when entrepreneurs want to move into the Far East.
We're talking with Vincent Bremer of Orangefield ICS about doing business in Hong Kong and China. Today's Entrepreneur on CJAD at 7:15.
For professional advice with a personal touch, consult Fuller Landau, Chartered Accountants and Business Advisors. Click on flmontreal.com.
Coming up to 7:20 on today's Entrepreneur, inspiring stories from outstanding business people. Dan Delmar and Josh Miller with you of Fuller Landau. And this evening our guest is Vincent Bremer of Orangefield ICS. They help people do business in China and Hong Kong, where Vincent is now based for the last 4 years. And let's talk a bit about marketing, Josh, because I think it's very interesting when you have a service that's very unique. Certainly, Vincent, how do you go about promoting this service? Because essentially, your market is the entire world, pretty much. I mean, you must have clients from everywhere.
Yes, we do have clients from everywhere. Although we defined a number of markets where we specifically want to obtain clients from. As mentioned, Canada is one of them because we have a strong heritage here. We have a strong network of clients and business partners. We identified a number of key markets in Europe. The US is an interesting market for us. So basically in Canada, we have 2 dedicated agents, one in Montreal and one in Toronto, who are able to meet our potential clients and our introducers, explain what we can do for our clients, and then basically link them to the operations in China and or Hong Kong. And then the execution will be taking place in Hong Kong or in China. So it's sometimes directly through our existing network. We have links with trade organizations, chambers of commerce, law firms, banks. So they all introduce clients to us. So for us, it's important that they will keep us in mind if they have some clients who want to expand into Asia.
You definitely have competition in Hong Kong. Do you find that there's the same competition here in Canada for what you can offer?
No, in Hong Kong it's a very competitive market, and that's also why we decided that it's probably better to market outside of Hong Kong. So we don't really obtain that many clients in Hong Kong itself, because often already the clients decided which firm they're going to use. So that's why we have the agents in Canada. We have an agent in Germany, for example. So we use our offices network all around the world to obtain the clients, introduce our services, and then introduce them to our operations in Hong Kong and in China. Because if the client comes to Hong Kong or is already present in Hong Kong, we're probably too late because they already decided or they have a kind of relationship going with a provider or a business partner. So that's why, from a marketing perspective, we really put all the efforts in the market, the home market of the client.
So part of it must be that you must have a challenge of visibility. I mean, people, it's easier to do business with somebody if they at least recognize the name and recognize the firm. I know there's always the referral, and you have people on the ground for that and all your contacts. But then there's just making sure that people are somewhat familiar with the ICS name or the now Orangefield ICS. So do you use like social media or anywhere on the internet to try and have blasts out so that there's a bit of a comfort zone if somebody walks in and says, hey, maybe you can deal with Orangefield ICS, that it could be a familiar name to them at that point?
Yes, we do. We do a number of things. Of course, we have the website, which is a very easy one, and it's actually quite successful. Everybody we meet during events, client meetings, are part of our newsletter. So we have around 10,000 people who subscribe to our newsletter. We have a LinkedIn page specifically focusing on developments within Hong Kong and in China. So social media, we don't do Twitter or these kind of things, but the LinkedIn page is being used quite often. The newsletter is very well looked at, and the website. And then we have specific initiatives, marketing initiatives for certain markets. So in Germany, we do certain things. So during a national holiday, give people really try to strengthen the relationship through the agents and through our people in Hong Kong. We'll do the same for Canada. So that's what we are doing.
Vincent Bremer, our guest from Orangefield ICS, talking about doing business in Hong Kong and in China. Our conversation continues after the break at 7:23.
For professional advice with a personal touch, consult Fuller Landau, Chartered Accountants and Business Advisors. Click on flmontreal.com.
7:26, Josh. Vincent Bremer joins us from Orangefield ICS. He is based in Hong Kong, and his firm helps people do business in China.
And we were talking about marketing, and one question that is always important to me, because especially he's on the net and doing social media and doing worldwide business, is, do you measure your marketing efforts? Do you know how many people read your e-newsletters? Do you know how many people hit your site? Do you keep tabs on that so you know what works and what doesn't work?
Yes, we do, to a certain extent. And probably we're not as sophisticated yet as we need to be, because in our experience, especially as a service provider, a lot of the businesses comes from personal contacts still. So they might come in through the social media, the websites, but then it's the personal contact. So we have an idea about, like, from the 10,000 people who subscribe to the newsletter, 2,000 people really click into the content. So that's quite a good rate, I would say, because normally in Asia you get like 20 newsletters a day. So a lot of people just delete, and then so the 20% success rate is quite high. And then we have the same for the LinkedIn page. We know that we are being found on Google with the Google search. Probably as a corporate service provider in Hong Kong, we're not that high on the list. But like within specific areas, we're much higher. Like we also help charities to get started in Hong Kong, because Hong Kong is actually a very interesting hub to raise funds in Asia. So a lot of Western charities are setting up in Hong Kong to basically approach the Chinese market and raise funds. We're very high on that list, so we get a lot of referrals from that. So we measure that. But again, I think probably we need to be a bit more sophisticated and do a little bit more research on how much business is coming from it and how we can improve it. So that's work in progress.
And, we were talking about the acquisition earlier of ICS, and your name today, at least in Hong Kong circles and Canadian circles, is Orangefield ICS. Do you have a strategy at some point to just be back to your true name, your original name of just Orangefield? Like, do you think ahead and say ICS is a brand, and it's a worthwhile brand because there's name recognition, there's people that know that I guess product, that service? Do you think ahead and say, you know what, there's still a value there, but in the long run we might have to consider only just being Orangefield, which is the company that acquired?
Yes, but I think that's also why we kept the name ICS for the first period after the acquisition, because of the recognition and the brand. And especially in Canada, probably it's a way better brand than Orangefield. So from that perspective, we still get some leads or contacts from the past who like, oh, I used to work with ICS and I found your name, or I went through the internet and made sure that I came to Orangefield ICS. So from that perspective, we need to make sure that we don't lose that. But ultimately, of course, it is a bit of a mixed signal if you have different names throughout the group. So even if you did multiple acquisitions, at a certain stage you need to become consistent and say we're Orangefield and we're not Orangefield ICS and Orangefield X in another jurisdiction. So this is a transition period to make sure that we don't lose any of that history and that new clients or contacts are comfortable with the change, and then that will change. And
very important to manage that, that's for sure. When we come back after, I know, Dan, we're dying to ask questions about human resources and hiring and firing and what works there. And I think we'll tackle that when we come back after the break.
Sounds good. Vincent Bremer, our guest of Orangefield ICS on today's Entrepreneur at 7:30.
For professional advice with a personal touch, consult Fuller Landau, Chartered Accountants and Business Advisors. Click on flmontreal.com.
7:36 on today's Entrepreneur. Welcome back. A program about the entrepreneurial spirit that drives Quebec business. Dan Delmar and Josh Miller with you. And our guest this evening is Vincent Bremer of Orangefield ICS. They help people and businesses do business in Hong Kong and China. And Vincent, that certainly requires a very particular skill set. So let's talk about HR for a little bit and the type of people you look for. Obviously, multilingual is an asset. What are some other qualities that you look for in your employees?
Most of our employees are educated in the West. So most of our staff is obviously Chinese staff. In Hong Kong, a lot of the people were educated in Canada. So they moved to Canada for their education, or their family moved to Canada before the handover back to China. So we have a lot of Hong Kong Canadians. So they speak Cantonese, which is the local dialect in the southern part of China and in Hong Kong. But they also speak Mandarin, which is the official language of China. Obviously, they're fluent in English, and sometimes they even speak other languages as well. And I think the biggest skill they need to have is really build the bridge between the East and the West. So being able to understand what Western clients need if they do business in China, but also understand the local mentality and culture to be successful in China. So I think our staff is able to connect the dots between the East and the West. Being able to speak the language, being able to understand both cultures and mentalities if you are helping clients to get started.
What about training? When somebody comes on board, is there a specific training program they have to endure? Do you kind of say, well, these are our certain policies and I guess functions that you have to?
Yes, we have an
follow?
onboarding program for each staff. Most of our staff are qualified accountants, or they're on the legal side, on the company secretarial side, because most of the maintenance issues, if you are dealing with a company, are from a legal perspective or from a financial perspective. So they already have a certain standard compared to unexperienced staff. And then we have an onboarding program on what are our policies, our manuals, procedures for dealing with clients, but also internally, because we often manage quite sensitive things for clients. We do their cash management, we take care of their books. So it's very important for clients to feel comfortable with that, and that comes with very strict manuals and procedures.
Confidentiality is huge.
Confidentiality is huge. Trust is huge, yes.
Now, hiring and firing. There's got to be certainly different rules. Certainly we know Hong Kong, or people don't necessarily know, but there's very low unemployment in Hong Kong. So maybe you can explain a little bit your hiring and firing issues that you have to deal with.
Yes,
We'll start with hiring.
Hiring, yes. Let's start with the positive. Hiring is very difficult. It's a very competitive market. Low unemployment, probably. For the people we're looking at, there is no unemployment. Within the service industry, there's probably too much demand and too little supply. So people tend to job shop, if that's a proper word, quite a lot. And especially the young generation feels it's quite natural for them to stay within a job for 1.5 years and then move on, even though they still see the challenge, they still see the development. But for them, it's just time to move on.
Is there anything you do differently that maybe keeps the people under your banner?
Yes.
And so that they don't leave?
Yeah, so we spend more time on getting them involved with the day-to-day business, understanding what we're doing, communication. We have monthly events whereby we explain what we're doing with clients, some developments. We spend more time on training. Probably compared to a local firm, there's a better work-life balance because in a local firm it's much more about performance and probably less so about getting the appreciation for your performance and being able to spend a bit more time with the family and the weekends. So we try to distinguish ourselves with local firms in that sense, but it's still a very difficult market to find staff.
Have salaries been on the rise?
Yes, like inflation in Hong Kong is 5%. Probably in China even higher. The salaries in China have been increasing with 10%, 9-10%. So that's more or less what they expect, which is difficult to maintain, of course, because clients will not expect the same increase.
No, clearly not.
Every year, but they also have the same challenge if they staff. They have to find their employees. But yeah, inflation, salary increases have been very high. So it's a challenge to basically provide something else to staff rather than just the salary increase, because it's impossible to continue that route because ultimately it stops somewhere. So we are trying to distinguish ourselves in other areas rather than just salary.
Now, let's talk about the other side of it. And I know you don't necessarily want to get rid of people because it's so hard to get to begin with. But what happens if there's somebody that you do necessarily want to say thank you very much, but you're not working out with us for whatever reason? Is it easy to do? Is it difficult? Do you not have to worry because they leave anyways?
Yeah, I think we need to make a clear distinction between Hong Kong and China. Hong Kong it's relatively easy, I would say. You have a mutual notice period in the contract, so both for the employer and the employee, you have the similar notice period. So if it doesn't work out, you can serve the employee notice, and basically you have sometimes for a long-term employee you need to pay them a long service payment, but that's it. And then after they serve their notice, they can leave the company. In China, it's much more difficult to get rid of your staff if something is going on, even though you know they did something wrong and deliberately so, even sometimes fraud. Mm-hmm. Proving it is a different way, and especially if you have to fire a local Chinese staff as a Western company, that can be quite challenging, and you don't want to go to court in China, to be honest. So you need to find a way to separate ways, which will save the face of the employee. And basically also look after your own interest.
It actually sounds a little bit similar to Quebec. Not that we're communist or anything, but certainly to let go of an employee in Quebec, as certainly somebody that's been relatively long-standing, you need just cause, and you need a lot of backup information to say thank you, but you're not working out. And if not, it's difficult to get rid of them. It could be very expensive, and at worst, they might even be able to get their job back if they apply to the courts. So. I can well imagine that it's really difficult. Now, I guess an entrepreneur coming in to start a business, where do they even begin to look for people? Is it they use placement agencies? Do they place ads online, I guess?
Yeah, you have sites for jobs, like websites. So there are a number of ways of finding the right staff, and of course, depending on the expertise. So websites, recruitment firms, HR firms. You have certain networks where you have certain qualified staff where you can find people. So there are different platforms to obtain staff. Probably again in China a bit more difficult compared to Hong Kong. Hong Kong is a very educated market, so in that sense, it's easier to identify the targets. Probably to get the targets on board is more difficult because of the situation we just described. But at least you are able to find the candidates. While in China, finding the candidates is probably more of a challenge, but that's getting more developed.
And you mentioned, you try to have a good work-life balance, but when you're dealing with customers that are overseas in 12, 13-hour time difference, you still have to explain to your team that I know it's 8 to 6 or 7, but by the way, we have customers that are working from 8 p.m. till 8 a.m. We have to be a little bit mindful of that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We have clients coming all over the world, so time difference is always an issue, and especially with North America, 12 hours, it's probably the worst time difference you can imagine. But then you need to be flexible. So if they stay longer to basically have a talk with the client when they start their time, then you will not say to them, you need to come in tomorrow at time. You will just give them a little bit of time to come in later or just do other things, and then they will work later. They're in that sense, that's the nice thing. They feel very responsible towards the clients. They're very disciplined in that. But I think it's give and take as a company. If they come in, they stay in longer because they need to have a discussion with the client. That's it.
Thank you very much, Dan. I think we're going to move on from Orangefield because we've heard a lot, and there's actually quite a number of similarities with some Quebec entrepreneurs. But now we're going to move on when we come back from the break. Doing business in and through Hong Kong. So what are the pitfalls? What are the challenges? Let's see if Vincent can help guide us through.
Sounds good. Today's Entrepreneur on CJAD 800 at 7:45.
For professional advice with a personal touch, consult Fuller Landau, Chartered Accountants and Business Advisors. Click on flmontreal.com.
Inspiring stories from outstanding business people. Welcome back. Dan Delmar and Fuller Landau's Josh Miller with you. And our guest this evening is Vincent Bremer of Orangefield ICS. And let's delve a bit more into Hong Kong, Josh.
And listen, we know the world is getting smaller. We know that business just doesn't happen in Canada or let alone North America, and that Hong Kong and certainly the mainland China is a major factor when you're looking at expanding your operations, doing business internationally, whether you're sourcing from there, whether you want to sell to there because they're increasing their consumer market incredibly. That's where their focus is. But the question I guess I have is to Vincent, why would somebody open up a company in Hong Kong? What is maybe some of the specific benefits that they would get of doing so?
I think for all the reasons you just mentioned, the growing market in China. So Hong Kong is really an international platform for doing business in the region. So Hong Kong is being used for clients doing investment in Southeast Asia in general, and probably more specifically China. So traditionally we had a lot of clients doing their manufacturing in China and then exporting it via Hong Kong through the home market, because trading through Hong Kong made things way easier if you look at cash management, establishing your operations, controlling your operations in Hong Kong or in China through Hong Kong. So that's really one of the...
And I think it's a great comment to make, because a lot of people, certainly entrepreneurs, small, medium-sized enterprises say, you know what, let me go to China direct. Let me go to the mainland directly and try to make it happen. Where are maybe some of the pitfalls or challenges, and how does Hong Kong kind of mitigate, or going through Hong Kong kind of mitigate a couple of those?
Yeah, there are a couple of advantages. So there are a couple of practical advantages. So if you set up your legal structure in China, it's easier if you do that through Hong Kong. The Chinese authorities will recognize a Hong Kong company much more easily compared to using a Canadian company incorporated WUFI, which is the Chinese entity. So from a practical perspective, it's way easier to do it through Hong Kong. Then the second issue will be cash management. It's quite easy for Hong Kong to receive funds from China and basically distributing it back to wherever the client is located. In Hong Kong, you have all the international banks present where multi-currency accounts. You can also deal with probably Hong Kong is one of the most sophisticated offshore markets for RMB. So basically the local Chinese currency which can be dealt with outside of China. So the Hong Kong is probably the most sophisticated place to do that. And then there are some tax advantages as well. If you have your Hong Kong company hold your WUFI, there's a tax treaty in place. Obviously, there's an interest of China to use Hong Kong because it's ultimately part of China. And then Hong Kong is also able to conclude tax treaties with other countries. So if you have a tax treaty in place like with Canada, it's probably more efficient to get funds back through Hong Kong as well rather than from China directly. So there are a couple of practical and legal advantages.
And when we come back from the break, we'll talk a little bit more about that double tax arrangement or that tax treaty between Canada and Hong Kong and where the benefits are today about setting something up. And by the way, when Vincent says woofy, he's not making dog sounds. It's a wholly foreign-owned enterprise. So just so that everybody knows what we're talking about.
Today's Entrepreneur on CJAD 753.
For professional advice with a personal touch, consult Fuller Landau, Chartered Accountants and Business Advisors. Click on flmontreal.com.
Vincent Brimmer is our guest of Orangefield ICS. Josh, we're talking about doing business in Hong Kong and how Vincent's company facilitates that.
And Dan, there's so much to talk about. We're not going to get to everything. But the one thing that I did want to bring up is our tax treaties. There's a new tax treaty between Canada and Hong Kong that came into force this January. And I just wanted to touch briefly on it, maybe not so much from a Canadian-Hong Kong standpoint, but how China is implicated and how it's good for Canadian entrepreneurs and Canadian businesses.
Yes, I think it's probably good to explain that all the business from China starts in Hong Kong. So all the Chinese entrepreneurs have their first stop overseas. Technically for them, Hong Kong is overseas, is Hong Kong. So without the treaty, probably it would be less interesting to move into Canada without the treaty in place between Canada and Hong Kong. So keeping that in mind, setting up through Hong Kong and then investing into Canada will give a lot of benefits for Chinese investors, reduction of withholding taxes. So I think Canada always has been an interesting market for Chinese to invest into, but the treaty will definitely make it more interesting and more beneficial to do so, because all the business from China goes through Hong Kong. So the treaty will definitely help.
And from a Canadian perspective, I can certainly add that now that there is a double tax arrangement or a tax treaty with Hong Kong, if you're going to open up a subsidiary in Hong Kong to sell to your international clients, certainly the tax rate in Hong Kong is so low, and there's actually no tax on any Hong Kong revenue that's not sourced in Hong Kong, that is international. And when you distribute the funds, which is easy to do from Hong Kong to Canada, there's no withholding tax, so you can pull out the money tax-free, which is certainly a huge advantage. So these double tax arrangements are actually pretty good, but every case is different, no doubt. And as we come to the remaining moments of the show, and as we ask our guests all the time, this one might be a little different, but Vincent, perhaps you can tell us what your one piece of advice is for today's entrepreneur.
If you start your business in Asia or in China specifically, focus on your sales, focus on your product. Really start worrying about staffing later on. Make sure first that you have the contracts, that you have the clients in place, and then once you are comfortable with that, because it's quite a big step into China in general, I would say. Either you do it through Hong Kong or directly into China. It's a very challenging market. It's a very interesting market. It's a very growing market. But focus first on getting your business running, and then start hiring staff and start dealing with those kind of issues. Because setting up your entity probably is already a challenge enough. Finding the right customers There's huge potential, but then the staffing should focus on sales rather than on taking care of your administrative burden. And once that's done, that's the next step, I would say. So that makes it a little bit less challenging.
And, I perfectly agree. You really have to, if you don't have your sales, if you don't have your revenues, the cost can be so prohibitive that you can be dead before you even get out of the water. So thank you very much, Vincent. Yeah, Dan, we come back next week with startups.
Excellent.
The theme is startups. We're going to have a couple of companies that only started a few months ago. We're going to talk about their challenges of getting out into the market.
Should be fun, and thanks to Vincent Bremer of Orangefield ICS. Thanks, Vincent, and hopefully Josh shows you a good time tonight in Montreal.
Thank you.
Oh, that's not possible.
And we'll see you back next Monday night at 7 for another episode of Today's Entrepreneur. It's 8 o'clock right now on CJAD 800.